The 18-year-old blind musical genius was about to learn that impossibility was just another word for hasn't seen what Jimi Hendrix can do. Stevie Wonder stood in Studio A at Motown Records in Detroit, his hands moving across the harmonica he held with the casual confidence of someone who had mastered every instrument he'd ever touched. It was October 1968, and at 18 years old, Stevie had already established himself as one of the most versatile musicians in popular music, capable of playing piano, harmonica, drums, and bass with a sophistication that amazed even veteran performers twice his age. Despite his youth, Stevie's musical abilities were already legendary. Born Steveland Hardaway Judkins, he had been blind from birth, a condition that seemed to have heightened his other senses to extraordinary levels. His ability to hear and process musical information was so advanced that he could identify individual instruments in complex arrangements, recognize subtle harmonic relationships that escaped trained musicians, and compose complete songs in his head before ever touching an instrument. "Nobody can play harmonica and guitar together," Stevie said with the quiet certainty of someone whose musical abilities had never been successfully challenged. "I've tried it myself, and it's physically impossible. The breathing techniques required for harmonica are completely incompatible with the hand coordination needed for guitar. You can't do both simultaneously and maintain any kind of musical quality." The statement carried particular weight coming from Stevie. Despite his youth, his musical intelligence was already legendary at Motown. He had demonstrated an ability to hear and understand musical relationships that escaped most trained musicians, and his mastery of multiple instruments had shown that he could execute virtually any musical concept that occurred to him. His hits like "Uptight, Everything's All Right" and "I Was Made to Love Her" had demonstrated a sophistication in arrangement and performance that rivaled musicians with decades more experience. Stevie's assessment of the harmonica guitar challenge wasn't casual speculation. It was based on extensive personal experimentation. As someone who played both instruments at a professional level, he had spent countless hours attempting to find ways to combine them effectively. His harmonica work drew from blues masters like Little Walter and Sonny Boy Williamson, while his understanding of guitar had been developed through years of studying the instrument's harmonic possibilities, even though he primarily focused on keyboards. The challenge of simultaneous harmonica and guitar performance represented exactly the kind of musical problem that fascinated Stevie. He approached music with the curiosity of a scientist, constantly experimenting with new combinations of sounds and techniques. The fact that this particular combination had consistently defeated his attempts made it a source of ongoing frustration for someone accustomed to musical success. The musicians gathered in Studio A represented some of the most accomplished players in popular music. They included members of the Funk Brothers, Motown's legendary house band, whose contributions to the label's success had made them among the most recorded musicians in history. If anyone could have challenged Stevie's assessment, it would have been these players, but they were nodding in agreement with his analysis. "The problem," said James Jamerson, whose bass playing had defined the Motown sound, "is harmonica requires breath control and embouchure that demands your complete attention, while guitar requires hand coordination and finger independence that's equally demanding. Your brain can't process both types of musical information simultaneously." Earl Van Dyke, Motown's keyboard director and a multi-instrumentalist himself, offered his perspective. "I've seen musicians try to play multiple instruments at the same time, and it always results in compromise. You might be able to play simple patterns on both, but you can't achieve the level of musical sophistication that makes either instrument effective in a professional recording."
Benny Benjamin, whose drumming had provided the rhythmic foundation for countless Motown hits, was more direct. Some things just can't be done. Harmonica and guitar require completely different types of musical thinking. It's like trying to write two different songs at the same time. What none of them knew was that Jimi Hendrix was visiting Motown that day as a guest of one of the label's executives. He had been given a tour of the legendary studio complex and was now standing quietly outside Studio A, listening to the discussion about the impossibility of simultaneous harmonica and guitar performance. Jimi had spent much of 1968 exploring exactly the kind of musical territory that Stevie was describing as impossible. His background included extensive study of blues harmonica, an instrument he had learned during his years of playing backup for R&B artists who required versatility from their musicians. His guitar work had shown that he could integrate influences from multiple instrumental traditions while maintaining technical precision. During a break in the session, Jimi knocked quietly on the door. "Excuse me," he said when Stevie answered. "I'm Jimi Hendrix, and I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about harmonica and guitar. I was wondering if I might be able to try something that could change your mind about what's possible." Stevie's face lit up with interest. He knew of Jimi's reputation as a revolutionary guitarist, and the suggestion that there might be a solution to the harmonica guitar challenge intrigued him as a musical puzzle worth exploring. "Of course," Stevie said, "but I should tell you that I've spent years trying to find a way to make this work. The technical demands are beyond what any single person can coordinate." "Maybe it's not about coordination," Jimi said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about finding a different relationship between the instruments. Would you mind if I borrowed a harmonica and showed you something?" Stevie handed over his harmonica, a professional-grade Hohner Marine band that he had been using for recording. "I'd be very interested to see what you have in mind, but I'm telling you, it can't be done at a level that would be musically meaningful." What happened next left everyone in Studio A speechless for the next 20 minutes. Jimi positioned the harmonica in a special harness that allowed him to play it hands-free, similar to what Bob Dylan had used during his electric period, but with modifications that gave him greater control over breath dynamics and note selection. The harness was positioned to allow precise embouchure control while keeping his hands completely free for guitar work. With the harmonica secured, he picked up a guitar and began to play both instruments simultaneously. But what he was doing went far beyond anything that had been attempted before. Instead of playing simple harmonica melodies over basic guitar accompaniment, Jimi was creating complex musical conversations between the two instruments. The harmonica provided melodic lines that complemented the guitar's harmonic progressions, while the guitar created rhythmic and harmonic foundations that enhanced the harmonica's expressive possibilities. The technique required an entirely new approach to breathing and hand coordination. Jimi had developed a method of breath control that allowed him to maintain continuous airflow for the harmonica while executing complex guitar passages that required precise finger positioning and timing. His breathing rhythm was so controlled that he could sustain harmonica phrases while performing intricate guitar chord changes and single-note runs.
Most remarkably, Jimi was using the unique tonal qualities of each instrument to create musical textures that neither could achieve alone. The harmonica's ability to bend notes and create microtonal inflections was enhanced by the guitar's capacity for harmonic sophistication and rhythmic complexity. He was using the harmonica's expressiveness to add emotional color to the guitar's structural harmony, while using the guitar's rhythmic capabilities to provide a foundation that made the harmonica's melodic explorations more compelling. The result was music that sounded like a complete ensemble rather than a single performer attempting to play two instruments. The harmonica and guitar weren't simply playing simultaneously. They were interacting in ways that enhanced the musical effectiveness of both. Jimi was creating call and response patterns between the instruments, using the harmonica to answer guitar phrases and vice versa. As the performance continued, it became clear that Jimi had solved the technical challenges that had defeated every previous attempt at harmonica-guitar integration. His breathing technique allowed him to maintain continuous harmonica performance while executing complex guitar passages, and his hand coordination was so sophisticated that he could respond to harmonic changes in real time while maintaining melodic coherence on the harmonica. The most extraordinary aspect of the demonstration was how Jimi was handling the musical complexity in real time. He wasn't simply executing pre-planned patterns, he was improvising on both instruments simultaneously, making musical choices that showed he was hearing and processing the interaction between harmonica and guitar as a unified musical concept rather than two separate instrumental parts. "How is he doing that?" James Jamerson whispered to Earl Van Dyke. "I don't know," Van Dyke replied. "He's making it sound like the harmonica and guitar are having a conversation with each other. It's like he's got two different musical minds working at the same time." When Jimi finished the demonstration, Studio A remained completely quiet for what felt like an eternity. Stevie Wonder, whose musical intelligence had never been challenged by any instrumental technique, was the first to speak, but his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand how that's possible," he said slowly. "What you just did goes against everything I thought I knew about how those instruments work together. You made them sound like they were designed to be played simultaneously." The statement was particularly striking coming from someone whose entire career had been built on expanding the possibilities of musical performance. Stevie had pushed the boundaries of what was considered achievable on every instrument he played, but what he had just witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about musical coordination and instrumental integration. James Jamerson nodded in amazement. "I've been playing music professionally for 20 years, and I've never heard anything like that. You weren't just playing two instruments, you were creating music that couldn't exist without both instruments working together." Earl Van Dyke was equally impressed. "The way you were using the harmonica's expressiveness to enhance the guitar's harmonic possibilities, and vice versa, that's not just technical skill, that's a completely different way of thinking about musical relationships." But it was Stevie's next statement that would be remembered and quoted for decades afterward. "I think I need to stop talking about what's impossible in music," Stevie said quietly, setting down his own harmonica with a gesture that seemed final. "If someone can do what you just did, then I don't understand musical limitations as well as I thought I did." The impact of that October afternoon extended far beyond the immediate session and would influence Stevie's approach to musical exploration for the rest of his career. The experience of witnessing a musical impossibility become reality taught him that his understanding of instrumental limitations had been too narrow, and that creative innovation could transcend what seemed like fundamental physical constraints.
"That day changed how I think about musical boundaries," Stevie said in interviews years later. "Jimi showed me that the limitations I thought were built into instruments might actually be limitations in my own imagination. He proved that if you approach music with enough creativity and persistence, you can transcend what everyone thinks is possible." The encounter fundamentally altered Stevie's approach to musical experimentation. Before meeting Jimi, Stevie had viewed instrumental limitations as fixed boundaries that defined what was achievable. After witnessing the harmonica guitar performance, he began to understand that apparent limitations were often just challenges that hadn't yet been solved through sufficient creativity and technical innovation. Stevie's subsequent albums reflected this transformation. His work in the 1970s showed a new willingness to experiment with instrumental combinations and techniques that pushed beyond conventional boundaries. Albums like Music of My Mind and Talking Book demonstrated approaches to multi-instrumental performance that reflected an understanding that creative innovation could overcome apparent technical limitations. The session also influenced Stevie's collaboration with other musicians. His later work showed a greater openness to musical possibilities that seemed impossible, leading to partnerships and projects that explored uncharted territory in popular music. His willingness to work with electronic instruments and synthesizers partly reflected the lesson he had learned from Jimi about the importance of remaining open to new technical possibilities. For the Motown musicians who witnessed the performance, it became a touchstone for discussions about the relationship between technical limitation and creative possibility. The fact that Jimi had solved a problem that had been considered unsolvable by some of the most skilled musicians in the industry challenged their assumptions about what constituted genuine musical impossibility. James Jamerson, whose bass innovations had defined the Motown sound, was particularly affected by what he witnessed. "That afternoon changed how I approach my own instrument," he said. "If someone can make harmonica and guitar work together like that, then maybe I've been thinking too small about what bass can accomplish in an ensemble." Earl Van Dyke began experimenting with multi-keyboard setups that allowed him to layer different instrumental sounds in ways he had never previously attempted. Watching Jimi play those two instruments taught me that musical boundaries exist mainly in our minds. If you can conceive of a sound, there's probably a way to create it. The story of that afternoon spread throughout the music industry, becoming legendary among musicians as an example of how creative innovation could transcend apparent impossibilities. Musicians who heard the story began questioning their own assumptions about instrumental limitations, leading to new approaches to performance and composition that expanded what popular music could accomplish. Most importantly, the session demonstrated that musical genius isn't just about mastering individual instruments. It's about finding new ways to combine musical elements that create possibilities no one had previously imagined. The encounter showed that true innovation often comes from refusing to accept conventional wisdom about what's possible, and from approaching seemingly insurmountable challenges with creativity and persistence. If this story of creative innovation and the power of questioning musical limitations inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who appreciates how true mastery sometimes means seeing beyond conventional boundaries to discover new possibilities. Have you ever witnessed someone accomplish something that everyone said was impossible? Tell us about it in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more stories about the moments when artistic innovation redefined what we thought was achievable.